Be honest, guys. These goggles make me look nerdy. No, I know I always look nerdy, but I mean more nerdy than usual. Let's just embrace it.
Hi guys, this is Pete and welcome back to my Deep Dives series. Today we're going to be looking at 4-bet pots, which are very tricky situations in poker. So if you like the content, don't forget to smash the like button and check out carrotcorner.com for all of our paid content, including the famous Carrot Poker School. Okay, let's get to the video.
Welcome once again, ladies and gents, to Deep Dives to the bottom of the ocean, to this shipwreck where we are rummaging for treasure. The treasure, of course, being the knowledge about how to play 4-bet pots in a better way. These are mostly uncharted territory, if you'll excuse the pun. Not a lot of people make content about 4-bet pots because, let's face it, they're kind of rare, but they are really impactful to your win rate in one sense, and that's that they are huge pots. They're also really tricky, and I think they're quite difficult to get right, so I thought this would be an awesome topic for us to explore today. Pocket jacks in a small blind, unknown player goes ahead and makes it 2.2. We make it 11.4 and they make it 27.6. I think the odds of this being irregular have just gone up substantially, just through the combination of 2.2 and 27.6, not really recreational sizing. If a recreational player is going to 4-bet here, they'll often make it like 35 or something obnoxious, or maybe they'll like min-click, but they rarely make it a normal size like this. We decide to call, and the flop is sort of horrific. I think one thing to actually do here is admit that fortune reversal has taken place. We were dealt jacks pre-flop. We were feeling okay about it at this point in the hand. Then this happened. This is fine. This happens. This is really bad. The EV of jacks has now been decimated, and this is bad as well. Okay, we have an overpair, but clearly our equity is not great against anything here when we're behind. We're very far behind. This is a low EV spot. Villain bet's about 40% pot, little bit offbeat. I'd expect a smaller bet here usually, against which I would have a pretty comfortable call. Against this, you can probably call or raise. Like, it's a kind of horrible situation where if you go all in, you're completely dead when called, like you're getting absolutely eviscerated. However, the fold equity is incredibly useful, and villain probably has to get it in with some hands we're doing quite well against, like ace-king, especially with a heart, or something of that nature. If villain has a hand like king-queen offsuit with one heart, you can see that jam is okay. If they have something like just 2 overcards with a gutter, you can see that the fold equity is good. According to the solver here, jacks is a mix of jam or call. If you have the jack of hearts here, you just stick it in immediately. Now your equity is even higher. At low SPRs, when you're out of position, putting all of the money in as your primary form of continuing is a really standard thing. There's not that much that you're actually risking. So people look at this and think, I don't want to stack off with jacks, right? They use this term. They're thinking in big blinds, they're thinking in stacks. That is arbitrary, guys. We should be thinking in stack to pot ratio. When there's a lot of money in the pot, it's almost like you're just playing really shallow stack. So you don't actually have to be very thrilled about shoving jacks here for it to still be the right play. Obviously, folding is out of the question here, even though this is a spot that we're pretty unhappy in. I do want to point one thing out, and that's that folding only actually loses 1.8 big blinds. That's on the bottom right there. As we can see, it wouldn't be a huge deviation to fold. If we did think our opponent was incapable of c-betting lightly enough here, they were just basically using this bigger sizing with the value range, we could fold our hand immediately and just fully commit to the idea that this is a horrible spot and people are under bluffing. I don't know that that's true though. So yeah, we do opt to continue here. Can see that we're doing a lot of jam at this low SPR. Even something like 10s with a heart is okay to jam. Even something like 8s with a heart is okay. At low SPRs, you can just put a bunch of money in, unless, of course, you have the immortal nuts that blocks villain's investment range and unblocks their bluffs when you have something like king, queen of hearts. You're a really big mistake not to slow play. We've talked about this before. You just don't want to fast play invincible hands or near invincible hands at these really low SPRs. That's the time to slow play them, but do fast play them at big SPRs where you have to build the pot. This is a really crucial concept to do with urgency. Slow play, big hands at low SPRs, and be more inclined to raise your big hands all the time out of position at high SPRs like in single raise pots. We do opt to just call here. I suspected jam might be alright. I didn't really fancy it against villain's range. I felt like villain's range is probably, if anything, stronger than it's meant to be here, both pre-flop and on this node as well. I really don't think folding is too absurd, by the way, in real life. What an awful turn. Fortune reversal. Again, we started with pocket jacks. We were kind of happy, unless we're the sort of people that just hate pocket jacks, which is a reasonable approach. I get it. But yeah, things have just gone from good to mediocre to bad to awful to terrible. just accept it psychologically. It's going to be easier, and it's going to be easier to avoid mistakes if you just accept psychologically that your EV is now basically 0 or very close to 0. Villain checks back here. In practice, I think this will be kind of more capping than it should be. Of course, they're meant to have some slow plays that can have the immortal nuts here. If they just have a hand like an ace, I expect quite a bit of betting to happen, but there will be some checking. I think the hands that will be checking too often here, meaning that they'll be a bigger part of the range than they're meant to be, they'll be more concentrated than they're meant to be, would be like kings and queens. So I really expect villain to have a hand like kings and queens very frequently here. I think it's just an absolutely likely candidate to play this way in reality. The 10 of clubs comes on the river. Let's quickly just take a look at villain's turn checking range here in theory before we look at what we did on the river, which is probably terrible. What we did in the river is probably going to be theoretically scorned by the solver. I doubt it's going to like it, but let's take a look at what the turn play is supposed to be first. Yeah, this is really amusing. The solver is checking its entire range back on the turn. It's basically saying, shit, I have lots of kings and queens and jacks. I have far more of them than you have, villain. This is, you know, villain talking to me here, roles reversed. So what am I supposed to do? I just have to check everything. You should have donk bet. Apparently I should have been donk betting the turn. We didn't give the solver the chance to donk bet. We forced it to check everything. But in spots where in position is checking back everything, that's a very clear indicator that out of position should be leading. Because there's a certain amount of betting that has to happen on pretty much any street in poker, even at low SPRs. And if it isn't coming from villain, it needs to come from us. So apparently we're meant to donk bet some stuff here. Jacks feels really middling. I don't know that we donk bet jacks. Maybe we would turn it into a bluff. I don't think so, though. I think this hand is still an okay check. So villain checks back. In real life, what's going to happen here is that people aren't going to slow play enough. When they have an ace, they're going to start betting sometimes. Not all the time. Not saying they're always going to bet an ace. When they have a bluff, they might also consider betting sometimes. So I think the hands that are very likely to pure check, i.e. check at a higher relative frequency to other hands than they do in GTO, are kings and queens. Now you might be looking at this thinking, Pete, how can they possibly check at a higher frequency when everything is a pure check? The reason is that if other hands don't check all of the time, then kings and queens are now checking relatively at a higher frequency compared to those hands than they are in the sim, thus they're becoming a bigger part of the range than they ought to be. So I think what's happening here is that we run into this and this more often. Does that mean that we can start spewing on the river? Maybe. Can we just say it does? Can we just say it does to justify what I do next? So on the 10 of clubs river, I decide to do something a little bit weird. I decide to bet this sizing. So first off, if we had a flush here, I think we would just jam. If we had an ace here, I don't know what we would do. Against that range check, we might just have to check or bet like really small. This sizing is kind of bizarre. I guess what I was trying to do in game here was, well, my whole gambit here was that I thought that villain had far too many combos like kings and queens. I didn't know that they would fold to the sizing, but I figured that usually people are quite inelastic. I thought the sizing looks very, very bad for villain from their point of view. Like if we just flip this around for a second, I don't think it looks like I'm doing a ton of bluffing. Okay, I could maybe have like 9s or 8s or something. 10s just made a set. Jacks will jam a lot pre. Queens plus is jamming pre, obviously. Am I really going to bluff jacks, or at least am I perceived to bluff jacks? Like, hopefully not. So I figured like getting folds a decent amount of the time from kings and queens here, and kings and queens being a decent part of villain's range, a bigger part than they're meant to be, was enough to justify this. I don't know, though. I got called. I got called by queens. It did have a heart. I think queens with a heart is an excellent bluff catcher and should probably just always call. Let's take a look. So we can see here the solver wants a couple of things to be true in order to bluff. It's basically only bluffing with the heart blocker. Thinks that's important. That's not always just because villain's going to have a flush sometimes with the 8 of hearts. It's also just that villain will call with their own heart blockers more than they will fold with them. So for example, if we did actually have jacks here and we decided to shove, we would get villain off of the other jacks without the heart, but not the jacks with the heart. So obviously the fold equity is better against the chop. There's these little things that go on here. The solver thinks my play is a mistake. It thinks jacks is a pure check. Well, it thinks it's a theoretical mistake. How big a theoretical mistake? My sizing here, this costs about 4 big blinds. That's not too bad considering the pot is already enormous. Like it's a hell of a lot of big blinds by this point. So I don't think that's terrible. It's not a huge deviation. And if villain is overfolding, then maybe it's okay. The thing is that when the pot's really big, A 4 big blind swing is simply not that large a percentage of the pot. Does villain fold more than this to the sizing? Well, they're meant to call kings sometimes without the heart, queens without the heart. They're meant to fold with the heart blocker though, but this is kind of a non-node. And yeah, this is a non-node. This isn't really an accurate output because the sizing's basically never been chosen. If I jam, kings is always meant to fold even with the heart. Queens is meant to always call with the heart. I guess we have more queen high flushes for them to block than king high flushes. Overall, a kind of interesting spot. I don't hate my play. I don't hate it. It gives villain the chance to really drastically overfold. With that small sizing, I think villain could overfold easily if they just decide that I have an ace, if they just decide that I'm not bluffing enough and just think that, you know, their kings and queens is no good here and they just arrive on this node without enough slow plays, without enough flushes. We've talked a lot before about how flushes really should always slow play the turn. I don't think they're going to. Meh, overall, I don't know. I give this play like a 4 out of 10. I don't think it's as bad as the solver thinks. I still think it's unclear whether it's good. Who knows? 4-bet pots. What an absolute mess. What a shipwreck, you could say. Let's move on. By the way, guys, when I came up with deep dives, this was way before like the whole submarine thing happened, if that's even still relevant when you're watching this. Maybe you're watching this a year from now, you don't even remember the submarine that sadly imploded at the bottom of the ocean or whatnot. I had actually no idea that was even going on when I came up with this concept. It's kind of funny. Someone left a comment saying, great use of the algorithm, Pete. It was a complete coincidence. But hey, if it helps get views, then every cloud, right? Let's move on to the next hand. In this hand, we have the ace of diamonds. Jack of diamonds in a small blind. It's opened by hijack. We go ahead and make it 11. They 4-bet. This is a really close spot. My solver actually thinks this is ever so slightly minus EV to call, depending on sizing, but it's by like a shred of a big blind. In practice, I should probably just let this go if I don't know who villain is, because if this is a recreational player, such a call swings to really negative. The range is just far too strong. If this is a reg, it's still kind of unlikely they're over bluffing. Hijack versus small blind. I think we should just fold here without being like absolute mad experts in 4-bet pots. If we're like a 4-bet pot scientific genius, we're like the Einstein of 4-bet pots, then maybe we can make this call. But I think I prefer fold. I wanted to fold pre, and I had this weird mental game leak that just seeped in randomly of like, you can't fold ace jack suited. You have to be tough. You have to be a man. It was like this kind of horrible mental game leak, and I looked back on it later, and I was like, where did that voice come from, man? That's awful. I don't want to be coerced by that voice anymore. Anyway, it's not a horrible call. You know, we can live with it. It's kind of break even. Close to break even at least, maybe slightly losing. So we check the flop here. Villain checks back. The 10 of hearts comes on the turn. So this is an interesting situation. When people check back this flop, of course they can have like a lot of slow plays at this SPR. I would guess that people are just misplaying here in some way. I'm not exactly sure how. Probably they have like too many hands like ace king. Like that's a hand they're a bit less likely to bet than the solver is, I would guess. I don't know how my fold equity is here, to be honest. I thought I would check again, get a bit more transparency. I think in GTO, this is a spot where our range is doing pretty well now. Like after we flat out the small blind, flop goes check, check. The 10 comes on the turn specifically. It's not a card they have a ton on this node. Because King 10 off doesn't 4-bet. King 10 suited just flats. Ace 10 suited just flats mostly. They don't have a lot of 10x at all. We have a shred. We have like ace 10 pocket 10s. We certainly have 10s more than they do. I can see that this is like a lot of bet here. Like a lot of 1/3, I would imagine. At this SPR, you don't really need to go big unless you think the opponent has a more mergy range. But here they have a more polarized range of overpairs and then overcards. So when your opponent has either overpair or overcards, you usually just want to use small sizing. So I think 1/3 here is totally fine. I don't know really whether it's better in practice than checking. I decided to check again, get a bit more information, transparency for free. When villain checks back, the 9 is another really good card for my range. If anyone's going to have queen jack, it's me. If anyone's going to have 9s, it's definitely me. Villain's checked twice now. I think they're not going to have enough overpair on this node. I opted to jam. They folded. This went well. Let's have a look in the solver though. Villain is just meant to bet the flop at a really high frequency. They're meant to check back kings more than ace king suited. That's kind of weird. This is what I mean. I guess ace king off here. This is also a hand that's just meant to check back a fair amount of the time. Nothing too obvious going on here, to be honest. This looks about normal. I'm not going to make a read on their flop range being super unbalanced or anything. It goes check, check. The 10 of hearts comes on the turn. We're meant to do a ton of bet here. This is even better than I thought it would be for our range. In theory, we apparently are entitled to 315 chips out of 540. That's a lot of chips. This means we can just bet for a ton of denial, bet for value frequently, bluff all of the air that we have. It's basically just a range bet spot for us, although of course there's not an EV loss by checking our hand. We check, again, trying to give villains some opportunity just to cap their range too much here. I also don't love this though, because if they are bluffing pre-flop, they're probably going to take a stab here like fairly often as well. But I do think that I can coerce them into just having a bit of a weaker check back range than normal with some alleged showdown value hand like ace, queen, ace, king that's still not going to call river or something like that. They do check back here. I think this again looks quite normal. I don't see like a massive deviation here. Maybe they have slightly less kings and aces now, but not by much. I think this is fairly normal. Maybe their range is a tad weaker. And then on the 9 of hearts river, what are we meant to do? It's another one of these really favourable spots for a range. We're entitled to most of the pot. When that's the case, you're going to be bluffing when you have air, when you have no showdown value. I wonder if we have any showdown value with ace jack here. Let's take a look at the EV. So we actually do. With ace jack of diamonds, we have 23 chips. That's 2.3 big blinds of showdown value. You can see that down here at the bottom right. So 23.45 chips in theory by checking. I think we'll do worse than that. I don't think we're ever even chopping here. Maybe we chop with another ace jack. I don't know. It feels grim to check. Bluffing is way better though. We're entitled to lots of the pot by bluffing. Spades and diamonds appear to be the suits we're really looking for. That'll be to do with how villain plays their backdoor. So some meta GTO shit that we don't actually care about here. If you care about those kind of blocker phenomena in this spot, you have your priorities very wrong. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say you don't deserve to play the game. That's a bit harsh. I'm going to say you have your priorities backwards. You need to rethink life. Not just poker, life, everything. Rethink your whole psyche. That's what I would say. So when we shove here, villain is meant to call with ace king fairly often. I think this is overfolded. This is surely overfolded. Meant to have these flushes. Meant to have this king 10. I don't think people even 4-bet king 10 suited pre-flop much here. Yeah, this has got to be overfolded. Okay, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of my play here. I'm going to be objective. I'm going to be honest. I didn't like my last hand's play. I do like the play in this hand. I think this river bluff gets an 8 out of 10. I think this entire hand gets an 8 out of 10 as well. Pre-flop, I would have preferred folding, but no harm done, I guess. We got away with it. On the turn, I don't think I prefer betting. You obviously can bet. I don't think I prefer it necessarily. I quite like the transparency idea. Yeah, I think we played this quite well. On to the last one of the video. Let's go. Our final 4-bet pot of the day. Jack of hearts, king of clubs on the button. Open, 3-bet. Mixing some 4-bet here. Normally there's some incentive to like pick up the pot pre-flop and not pay any rake, especially people aren't jamming enough on you here. A lot of that incentive is evaporated on GG Poker, where of course pre-flop is raked as well. The tyranny. You believe that shit? Let me know what you think about that in the comments. We get called this time, which is not what you want when you have the king of clubs, jack of hearts, because it's a god-awful hand to have to play a 4-bet pot with. The good news is that you do still have 2 overcards to lots of pairs. The bad news is that this flop is awful and the pairs are all now crushing you. You can bet here, you can check here. I think a hand like king of clubs, jack of hearts wants to do a ton of bet, has a lot going for it, gains a lot from fold equity, doesn't mind being jammed on. There'll be a lot of jam being played here by villain, by the way, at this low SBR on this board. They have hands like 7s, 9s that just want to jam right away probably because they get to deny equity and also are just surviving very well when called with the extra outs here. So we decide to check back. Solver thinks that we do mostly bet with this hand. We're doing quite a bit of betting here. This is a very neutral world though. Normally in 4-bet pots our range is going to be at a big advantage. That's just the way it goes. But on this specific texture, that's not so much the case. If we look at our EV here, EV for the in-position player here, it's basically exactly half of the pot. We can see from this number here that both players are entitled to roughly the same number of chips. That said, ranges are quite asymmetric. We have the big overpairs. Our overcards are doing a bit better than villains are in terms of EV here. In terms of equity, you can see that our range and position here contains some mergy hands like ace-king that the opponent isn't really going to have. The opponent's range, on the other hand, contains some awful hands like the king-jack suited. We don't have these. We would, of course, have just simply flatted those against the 3-bet pre-flop. So whenever your opponent has a ton of awful hands in their range, using a small bet at a decent frequency is never going to be a bad idea. Nevertheless, we decide to check this time, which is also fine. The turn comes the Queen of Hearts. This is a card that might seem okay to you for our range because it's a big card. But actually, when we check back the flop, we're going to move quite heavily towards things like ace-king more than we will ace-queen or king-queen. We don't have a lot of king-queen from pre-flop. We don't really have ace-queen from pre-flop because we don't 4-bet that. So in this particular configuration, the queen strikes me as not a very good card. It's usually the worst Broadway for the aggressor in 3-bet pots and 4-bet pots, and that's because the king very often 3-bets or 4-bets for value. The jack and the 10 very often construct 4-bet bluffs and 3-bet bluffs, whereas the queen is more of a caller's card pre-flop, for the most part, not fully, but for the most part. Therefore, the queen here in conjunction with these 3 mediocre cards, I think this is just a kind of bad spot for a range now. Villain should probably do a lot of betting here. They check again. I figured at this point that this is quite likely to be a recreational player. I don't know why. I think I had some kind of clue, and I decided that their range is probably just way too capped here. I don't know what I actually think about this bet. I think my plan was just to like do this and like maybe bomb a bunch of rivers, maybe like a club, an ace, a 10, a king for value, possibly a jack for value. I don't know. This is the idea. Villain jams, and of course we have to fold. Let's see what the solver thinks of this one. Man, 4-bet pots are just so dramatic in the solver, huh? He's meant to just lead range for third pot. The range advantage must be even bigger than I thought. 334 chips out of 500. So it's such a huge swing on this queen. Like on the flop, we go from villain having EV of half the pot to on the turn having EV of like 60% of the pot. That's a really big swing, 62% of the pot, something like that. Very big swing. It's the 5-10 game, by the way, so this is expressed in chips. Basically saying villain's EV is like 33 big blinds here, and ours is the rest, which is not very many. There's only 27 big blinds. So yeah, he's entitled to way more of the pot than we are. It's meant to bet everything. Wow, okay. So when they check, we kind of have a non-node, I guess. I don't know how well constructed the strategy is. It does make sense, though, that we can do some big bet. The reason for that would just be the villain's range, whatever it may be for checking, is going to contain some mergy hands. We're going to want to deny equity. We're going to want to get value a bit more greedily and urgently than normal here with our overpairs, and most of our value bets are just very big hands here. We have quite a polarized range, especially on the queen. We just have almost no queen X here. It's kind of sick just how badly we miss this card. Look here, guys, we have no ace-queen suited, no king-queen suited, no ace-queen off, hardly any king-queen off. It's just so easy to forget that in game here. It's so easy. So we decide to bet small, which I doubt is bad. I don't think it can be bad with the king-jack. We don't have any data about what villain's meant to jam. I guess they just have like a queen or an overpair, and they actually found a check. They found a slow play here. A lot of time people don't find that. So I think all in all, I give myself a 5 out of 10 for this hand. Like, it's fine, but there's just nothing really to talk about. The main interesting thing is that the queen is just not such a good card for you in a 4-bet pot or a 3-bet pot when you're the aggressor. It can be in a 3-bet pot in earlier position where the opponent doesn't flat a lot of offsuit queen. But if your opponent can have offsuit queens and you can't, the queen's going to be a bad card. I think that's the lesson for this third hand here in Deep Dives. If you enjoyed this video, do smash the like button, and if you like our content, don't forget there is loads more paid content over on carrotcorner.com, including the highly comprehensive, the absolutely gargantuan, colossal Carrot Poker School. Not sure if you can think of any more adjectives to explain the thoroughness of the Carrot Poker School, but it is our academic course. It's on carrotcorner.com. Check out if you haven't already. I'll see you guys back here for another video very soon. Hope you're enjoying Deep Dives. More to come.